And I actually didn't need to add those two libraries at this point, because really all we're going to do is test this create-cellstate function and make sure that it does what we want it to do, is create a hierarchy. So within my tests, I like to have a hierarchy. So since we're going to be testing cell state, and we're actually one hierarchy too deep already, because the reason I like this hierarchy is when I'm reading my tests, I want to be able to know when a test fails, how do I get to the test that failed? And the best way to do that is with these hierarchies. I'm curious. Empty arrow function. So let's see if there are some TypeScript jest lint rules. There is an eslint-plugin-jest. Let me pull this over so that everybody can see. This is something I need to get better at. I'm looking at this jest, these lint rules. In particular, I want rules like if somebody checks in a disabled test, I want it to fail. I guess a warning's fine. I don't want focus tests ever checked in. And identical titles, stuff like that. What we want to do is we want to add these rules to our so we're going to do an npm install save dev, and we're going to add the eslint-plugin-jest. The next thing we're going to do is we're going to edit our eslint rc and add the plugins for jest. I'm curious about these. So these are things that I don't have control over. It just bugs me to see a bunch of warnings. It always worries me that I'm doing something wrong. So we've added these, so we need to go into our eslint rc. That was weird. Why did it do that? Oh, it helps if we're trying to do it in the right place. So we'll look in our eslint rc, and inside of here, we need one more plugin, and that plugin is for, it's just called jest. So we'll add the jest plugin. At this point, it should start picking things up, but just to be sure, we just run lint on our domain, and I really hope. So interesting. Did we miss something? Then configure the rules you want to use under the rules section. I was hoping that it would just pick them up as a default. Ah, that's the one we want. We want just recommended. I like this better. So inside of the overrides, we're going to add, we want to only run this on our spec.ts files anyway. So we're going to pull this out of here. And in JSON files, we can't leave hanging. So inside of our overrides, it doesn't look like we have any that are specific to tests yet. So we'll do files. And inside of here, we'll add star.spec.ts and star.spec.tsx. Though I don't really use tsx, but if we ever do, it will extend. If we look, we want plugin-jest recommended. You know, I'm just going to take this and we'll copy this in here. So we got jest, we're extending jest recommended. I don't really think I want this rule turned off. For now, what does that rule do? Prefer expect assertions off. Suggest using expect assertions or expect has assertions. Oh, interesting. So you have to tell it how many assertions you're going to have, or just say that it has to have assertions. Oh, I like that. So you can set it up to be a warning with an async keyword. I like this better. I like this rule better than the one they set up. A lot better. So now we'll get a warning if we have an async keyword on our tests and we don't have an expect assertion. The expect assertions will force us to make sure that a certain number of assertions expects ran before our tests failed. And I'm running this at the command prompt because you're currently running a version of TypeScript which is not officially supported by TypeScript eslint. I think we're probably safe. Everything ran, so I think we're good. The main reason I went through all of this is to make sure that our tests are in a good state. What is the alternative to using expect? I don't know jest that well. And in fact, when I do jest testing, I have to have all the matchers up. Yeah, I think RedJam's right that you use the expects like normal, like Jasmine, but the point of the rule, the way I've got it set up, is that if we do an async test, a lot of times in Jasmine, what I'll do is I'll set a value that's set inside of the async stuff, and if that value never changes from false or whatever, then my test fails. I think this allows us to get that for free. Our cell state should have a test, and our test should test. It doesn't like test right now. Yeah, I like that. I really like that eslint is picking up right away that we shouldn't have invalid titles for jest. This is why I like to use linters a lot, because they teach me good practices. So our cell state should create a default cell state. That's one of our tests that we should definitely have. And our default cell state is, and I'm curious here, I love this. I love things like this that tell me, hey, you don't have any expectations in your test. So our expected value, and I need a const on that, and I shouldn't have backspaced through that, but our expected value is going to be a value of undefined. It's going to be read-only of false and valid of true. Try not to have too many expectations. I like to have one expectation per test, but sometimes there are tests where it makes sense to have more expectations, but there should be one primary expectation. And I want this to be a cell state. So I'm going to set that. And that is definitely not where I wanted that to come from. I wanted that to come from that. I'll need to figure out why it chose the other one. And the next thing we want is our results, which is just going to be us calling cell state or create cell state. And we are going to expect our results to, and I think we can just be 2 equal expected. So now, cannot find, oh, I need to import that. There we go. Import can be shortened. No, it can't be shortened. I mean, technically it can, but this is one thing about Angular and libraries. If you import from the library, sometimes you'll get weird compilation errors down the road. So we're going to do nx run domain test. We're going to give it the watch. Okay, so it passed. Took a while to get there, but we got there. So the next test is the create cell state should create a cell, a default cell state with the value passed in. So I think I'm just going to write tests for the common use cases. And so, oh, there's another library I forgot. One of my absolute favorites. And if you've worked with me, you've seen it quite a bit. But I am going to add at faker js-faker save dev. I love faker. It's just a library that generates a bunch of fake data for tests. That way I don't have to come up with random fake data. I added faker. Let's run these tests again. And the reason I want that is because we'll add a test value, faker, and we can import that from faker.js. And we want a data type, and we want a number, and we want that number to be between 1 and 9. So test value is going to be a valid number. Eventually we may want to come in here and validate that, but I don't think it makes sense right now. One thing I'm thinking about using is potentially using value objects for the test value. So the value on a Sudoku cell will be a value type of Sudoku cell value. And that way we can have validation within that value type that will make sure that it is that it's between 1 and 9 and things like that. One thing I need to investigate in TypeScript or JavaScript is if there's a good library to do value types, because we don't really have records in JavaScript yet. Once JavaScript gets records, and that's one of the things that's in proposal right now, then comparing objects to or records to records, we'll compare the properties and the values of the properties instead of references, which will make value types possible. But until then, we may have to use a library to do value types. So that's another thing I need to investigate. I'm going to finish this test, and then I've probably got to call it for the evening. We'll pick it up next time with tests again. So I renamed that variable just to make less typing here, but because really we want the expected of type cell state to equal value and then read-only false and valid to be true. And there's one other test that I expect to be a common test case that I will write. And then I think we'll call it for the evening. And this is going to equal results, or not result. Result should equal result. That doesn't do us any good. It should equal expected. So that test should pass. The last test is really the use case when we're setting up a should create a read-only cell with value. And these are the cases that I foresee us using in the future. So the first state is just to create empty cell states for the board. You know, we'll need to create 81 cell states, and most of those will be empty. The next one is potentially for testing. We may want to create a cell state with a value already set up. And the other place where this could potentially be useful is in, say, for example, if we build in a tutorial to teach people how to play, we may want to be able to generate a cell state with a certain value as part of the tutorial to teach people how to fill things out. So we're going to generate a value. And Austin and I actually had a fun discussion about this the other day about creating helper functions in your tests. And should you copy code over and over again, or should you create helper functions? And one thing, so your tests are code that you have to maintain. And why doesn't it like, oh, because I added a comma. So one thing that I think we can create a function for, because it's going to be useful, and it, you know, if we add more tests down the road, let's see, do we want it there? No, yeah, let's put it here. If we add more tests, we definitely want sorry, this is me, my brain freezing. But if we add more tests, we're definitely going to want a way to create this create these Sudoku cells over and over again, and it's going to be just the same stuff over and over again. Where we would be typing out the faker data type number min 1 max 9. And so those kind of helper methods are going to be useful, but anything more complicated than that, or that's going to do logic, you should try to avoid helper methods for that. The main reason being that you want your tests to be readable from top to bottom. You should be able to figure out what the test is trying to do. And by extension, that allows you to understand how we expect whatever we're testing. It allows us to understand what we're testing, right? If we read the test, we should understand how the thing should work. And so if we look at lines 22 through 25, or even this entire test, it's almost the exact same thing over and over again. But if I abstract that away into a function, then you can't really tell a lot about what the test is supposed to do and about what the whatever we're testing is supposed to do without going and looking up this function. And then the other thing is that your tests become dependent on these helper functions, and they can become really brittle as the helper functions grow and grow and grow. And so, creating fake values is a common thing we do, and so it's useful to create helper functions like that. But anything more complicated than that, you should really take the time to think about and potentially talk about with your team, because you could be hurting yourself in the long run. And so, and I almost did it again. It should just be value and then read only of true. And all right, so we've got our three tests. And these are the three test cases that I expect this to be used for the most. A default cell state where we're just going to just create a default cell that's going to be placed in the grid. A cell state that potentially could have a value in it. And then finally, a read-only cell state that has a value. And one thing that we may want to do, and we can do this down the road, is if they pass in a read-only value, we should require a value, because a read-only blank doesn't make sense. The way you do that is with discriminated unions. As we can see, our three tests pass. We've been good coders. We've taken the time to make sure that we're testing our application